Thank you so much, Dr. Fanai, for that wonderful and very interesting presentation, which really, aim of which was problematizing maybe the other approaches to how the event of Karbala is appreciated, and purporting the best and perhaps most applicable, universally applicable one to be the moral approach to it. Um, I would, of course, at this point, as I always do, we would request the participants who wish to ask any questions to Dr. Fanai to raise their hands, in as far as in the facility in this Microsoft Teams is concerned. When they raise their hands, um, indicating that they wish to ask a question, then when prompted, they can unmute their mics. And of course, if they have a camera and are able to show themselves on camera, ask their questions that way, to which Dr. Fanai can respond. A quick question from myself, Dr. Fanai, to start and get that ball rolling, is you principally mentioned the moral principle of justice and of dignity as the two main explanations. I'd just like to ask, on what moral framework are those principles based to say that justice and dignity are both instances of morality through which Imam Hussain alayhi salam's journey can be based?
A very good question. Thank you very much. The best version of moral philosophy that can accommodate these two principles is Kantian moral philosophy, which is a kind of deontologism. But I think these two moral principles are part of the common sense. I think this would be a weakness of any moral theory if that theory is not able to accommodate these two principles. And I think everyone agreed with me that we have some moral intuitions supporting these two principles. I think they are part of the common sense morality, and everyone accepted them. I think they are like self-evident truths. In fact, they are part of the starting point of theorizing in the domain of moral philosophy.
Thank you, Dr. Fanai. I saw briefly the Al-Mahdi Year 1 account hand was raised. I'm assuming that's a group of students at the institute, but that hand seems to have gone down now. Yes, they want to ask the students at Al-Mahdi Year 1 can unmute their mic and ask their question.
Salam, Dr. Fanai.
Salam alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for your presentation. I just want you to ask, would the mythical explanation for Karbala be tantamount to suicide? Would you say
that? Yes, but they said that they called it shahada. They called it shahada, and they said that if you have a particular command from God, you can do that. And they said so. Actually, they said that Imam Hussain received a particular, a specific command which only addressed to him. And therefore, that command is not applicable to anyone else. This was a particular duty of Imam Hussain to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Ali Zabojani has his hand raised. I can ask him to unmute his mic, maybe even switch on his camera if possible, and ask the question.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor. I hope you're well.
Assalamu alaikum. Very nice to see you. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes of the talk. So I guess there's just two really points of clarification or elaboration, if possible.
Yes,
So
please.
yeah, one is in your actually first three categories of theory. I think the first one you said deterministic, mystical, and then the different versions of the political. Each of them has moral implications. And so each could be described as moral in a particular sense. So even the deterministic vision encourages a particular type of moral disposition towards God, one also. And of course, the political ones are definitely could be described as moral in certain ways, and they're based on moral goals. So I guess it's like a bit of a comment. Of course, I can see clearly that there's a distinct sense of moral with your moral explanations, and that kind of relates to the previous question that these rely on a foundational notion of morality or intuitive notion of morality.
Okay.
So I guess that's one thing to maybe just hear your comments on, or for you to clarify.
Oh, very good. Let me
the question, and then I'll leave it to you. The real question, most interested in hearing actually, is what happens when there's a conflict between the principle of justice and the principle of dignity. And we could see that even in the case of Imam Hussain, we could interpret there being cases of conflict here. Is that for he saw dignity in giving his life, okay, and not surrendering. However, that may imply harm on his family, okay, and that might contravene the principle of justice.
Oh, very good, very good. Thank you very much for both questions and comments. With regard to the clarification, in the political explanation, of course, we need a norm. But the question is, what is the source of that norm? The source of that normative, premise that we need over there. As far as I know, according to Ayatollah Najafabadi and Dr. Shariati and Ayatollah Mutahari, the source of that norm is Sharia, is not morality, is not the universal morality. I think some of them explicitly mentioned this, especially Dr. Shariati and Ayatollah Najafabadi. They tried to justify their claim by appealing to Islam. They said that this is a religious duty of Muslims to rise up and to try to establish Islamic government. And none of them mentioned morality as we understand it in their explanation. This is about the clarification that you asked about. With regard to the conflict between dignity and justice, a very good question, actually, but I think his family was very happy. You know that in the last night, he asked everyone that if someone, they only want me, and you are free to go, and if you like, and all of them choose freely to stay with him and to support him and to do the same as he did. And I think, although it seems that there might be a conflict, apparent conflict, but actually there was no conflict at that case. But generally speaking, your question is a very good question, that if a similar situation, we have a conflict between two moral principles, what shall we do? And this is one of the most difficult questions that we have in moral philosophy. And I think the best answer to this question comes from Aristotle, and it is developed by Sir William Ross in his theory, if you are familiar, the ethics of prima facie duties. According to him, there is no secondary principle telling us which duty is more important in the case of conflict. And we have to solve the conflict case by case by looking at, by appealing to our intuition regarding that particular case. And because of this, we can't claim certainty about the solution. All the most we can have in that case is what is called probable opinion. This is the general principle that I think is the best solution for that conflict, generally speaking.
Thank you. Dr. Al-Yuza, do you have a follow-up or no?
I was just actually of sort, maybe just to, is that could we say that then for Imam Hussain, salamullahi alayhi, at that point he thought justice was prior. Hence, he offered his colleagues. This is a beautiful response you gave, actually, Dr. Fanai. He offered his colleagues the chance to, and his family and his friends to leave because he saw justice as prior to dignity? Or social justice prior to personal dignity?
I need to think more about this. But yes, it seems. You know, in one sense, according to Imam Ali, and we know that Imam Hussain followed Imam Ali in this way. According to Imam Ali, justice is the most fundamental principle of morality. But justice, in that conception of justice, has a particular definition. According to that definition, justice is to put everything in its proper place. And one of the application of that general principle is when it comes to the conflict between different values and different duties. If we have two or more than two conflicting duties or values, justice requires us to give priority to the one which is more important. So if we understand justice in this way, yes, you are right. This particular conception of justice is the most fundamental principle, and it requires Imam Hussain to solve the conflict between the principle of dignity and the principle of justice in that particular event, in that particular way.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Fanai. I see Shabir Muhammad also has his hand raised, but before I go there, I'm going to because my question I have is with a follow-up of what on the theme of just being discussed. Dr. Fanai, the instance you mentioned that Imam Hussain alayhi salam, as we have, of course, we are hostages to what we have access to the history, which is incomplete. But the instance you mentioned that Imam Hussain alayhi salam gave members of his family the option to go away from there and leave him at that stage, and therefore their lives would have been spared and they would have survived. And he mentioned, as you mentioned just now, they were after his blood, or they were after his bay'ah or his allegiance, not his family's. Of course, from the history, we know that Yazid was after the allegiance of certain individuals, not the family members of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So he would not have had to, having given his life, his own personal life, he upheld dignity, and he did not bow to the injustice. Had his family, we know human life is sacred. His family's life could have been spared, could it not, in that case? Because if his life had been sacrificed, he did not give allegiance, kept his dignity, upheld justice, and he was only after his blood. Why was it necessary then, on this approach of this moral explanation of justice and dignity, for also the children and other members of his family also for their lives to be sacrificed, whilst their allegiance was not sought at all anyway?
I think, yeah, this is a very important point, and my answer is that although Yazid was seeking his allegiance and bay'ah from Imam Hussain alone, and he was seeking his own blood, but to upholding the particular version of Islam that Imam Hussain wanted to make clear in that event, I mean the Alawism conception, Alawi conception of Islam, I think it was not enough if Imam Hussain sacrificed himself alone. I think it was necessary to sacrifice everything that he had to make it absolutely clear that something very, very important here is at stake, which deserves to sacrifice everything and all members of his family. I think this was the reason.
Thank you, Dr. Fanai. I could now move to Shabir Muhammad. I can ask him to unmute his mic.
Dr. Fanai, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I learned a great deal. So I just had a couple of thoughts, really, and comments and a question or so. So the first thing is, in your moral explanation, what is the definition of dignity, and is it relativistic or is it absolute? And that's relevant because if we apply that principle to the event of Karbala, then how does that understanding apply to our current lifetime and our current situation? Because we see much social injustice, and also many people live in what we would class as indignity. So should these people be rising up against indignity and standing up against the Yazid of our time, whoever that may be? And I'd be interested to know your thoughts on those 2 points. Really, what's the definition of dignity? Is it absolute or relativistic? And how does that understanding apply to our time?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting questions. Regarding to the definition of dignity, when we talk about the definition, we have to distinguish two types of definitions. One of them is what is called philosophical analysis. And this is very difficult and controversial among moral philosophers. They have a disagreement about the exact philosophical definition of dignity. But there is another kind of definition, which is the starting point of any philosophical investigation about that definition, which is a common sense definition of dignity. Everyone can understand, briefly speaking, everyone has a concept of dignity. And because if we do not have, we wouldn't be able to talk about dignity. When I talk about dignity, you perfectly understand me, and I perfectly understand you when you ask me about the definition of dignity. So we already have a brief understanding of dignity in common, and I think that would be enough for us to continue our discussion about this. I think we can define dignity in terms of being able to decide freely your destination and not being suppressed, not being, not having someone else to decide about your life. So this means a kind of freedom. You can say, at least freedom is one of the most pillar of dignity here. To not be under the influence and the force of the will of someone else. To be able to decide your, life. This is about the definition of dignity, I think. So this definition is absolute, I think. It is not relative and relativistic, and is absolute. But, I think it would be very rare that we live in a situation in which someone forces us, try to, impose upon us his decision, his will. This would threaten our dignity. To put the point another way, we can say that dignity is to be treated as an end, not as a tool. If someone else tries to use it as an instrument for his own purposes, then your dignity is under, threatened. And here you have to defend your dignity. And not only someone else, not only you should not allow someone else to utilize you as a mere tool against your will, against your inclination, but also you yourself has a moral duty not to treat yourself as a tool. I think this is what I can say. I don't know whether I answered properly your question or not. Sorry about that.
That's very helpful. But how do we apply this for our current times?
Okay, whenever someone tries to, uses us as a tool, we should, object. We should not allow anyone to do that. But in many cases, I think it is not necessary to sacrifice. Imam Hussain was in a very specific situation in which he has to choose between life and death. And in that situation, he said, Hayhat min az-zillah. But in our ordinary life, I think it is very rare for us to be in such a similar situation. But this doesn't mean that we can't, apply the principle underlying his decision to our own situation. For doing this, that would be enough if our situation is similar to his situation in a relevant way. If in our situation we have to choose between two options, one of them is compatible with our dignity and the other one is not. In all of these situations, we have to choose the option which is compatible with our dignity.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Fanai. I've seen Yusra Zahra's hand was raised before, it's lowered now, I think. And also the Al-Mahdi Year 1 group, who I think are based at the Institute, their hand went up and down again. I'm not sure if they have questions. If they have questions, can they raise their hand again, please? And we can I can let them unmute their mic. Year 1, the group of students at the Institute, do they have questions? No, I think not. That's okay. Oh, their hand has gone up again. I will make them present, and I think you can unmute your mic and ask the question, please.
Salam, Dr. Fanai. Sorry, I was just stemming.
Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam. You said not to use a tool, not to use yourself as a tool against your own dignity. So what did you mean by that? Could you just explain, please?
You know, human dignity is a particular moral status. And that moral status put some normative limitations on what we can do and what we can't do with ourselves. To treat ourselves as a tool is, let me give you some examples to illustrate the point by some examples. To use yourself as a tool, you know, when we use a tool, we have an end, and that end has an intrinsic value for us, and in order to actualize that end, we need some instrument, we need some tools which has instrumental value. They are valuable insofar as by that tool we can reach that end. This is the relationship between means and ends. Whatever which is a means has an instrumental value. But we are able, as human beings, to use something which has an intrinsic value as a tool. And in that case, we are going to do injustice to that end. If we use something which has an intrinsic value as a tool, what we are doing is an instance of injustice. Because justice requires us to treat what is an end as an end, not as a tool. And the same is true with regard to human beings. If human beings have intrinsic value, we should treat them as an end, which means that we should not, force them to do something against their will. And if, for example, we want to have some transaction with them, we should avoid deceiving them. This is a very clear example. If you deceive yourself, if you lie to yourself, if you, waste your time, for example, if you not try to improve morally and spiritually, all of them are instances of ignoring your dignity and using yourself as a tool. If you try to make money in an immoral way, here you are treating yourself as a tool. In all of these cases, human dignity is ignored, and the principle of human dignity is violated.
Thank you. On that point, I'm going to make this, Yusra Zahra in a way that she will be able to now unmute her mic, because I saw her hand going up again. Yusra Zahra, you'll be able to unmute your mic and your camera if you so wish, and ask your question now. I think probably is going to be the last question of the session because of our limitations of time. So Yusra, if you can go ahead and ask your question and unmute your mic.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. I am Yusra's father here, and we have a common question, all of us here. It relates to the fact that Imam Hussain alayhi salam himself explained that the reason why he is rising is because he had received letters from Kufa, and Islah, guiding the people of Kufa, was his only reason for going to Karbala. The second aspect is at a more macro level. It is that if we go to Surah 37, Ayat 107, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we had ransomed him with a greater sacrifice. And that greater sacrifice is said to be Imam Hussain alayhi salam sacrifice at Karbala. So is that predestiny or only consent that is applying? Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Regarding to the first point that you mentioned, I think the letters that Imam Hussain received from people of Kufa was not the only reason. It was just one reason, but not alone. It can be a reason if we attached to that invitation the principle of justice. Because as I said, the duty to establish a just institution, a just society, a just government is a collective duty. And those letters showed Imam Hussain alayhi salam that there are enough people to help him to establish such a just society. So he had a duty to do whatever he can in this way, but that duty was his duty not throughout that event. It was his duty before Ashura. It was his duty until he realized that people of Kufa changed their mind. From that point onward, this duty was removed from his shoulder because no one is able alone. No one is able to establish a just society alone without the help of other people. And because of this, we have in the Quran the famous verse according to which God said that we sent the prophet لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ in order for people to rise for justice. But regarding to the second point, the natural explanation, is compatible with a supernatural explanation. In fact, every natural event has two explanations. One of them is the explanation in which we appeal to the will of God, to His Mashiach, His decision. And the other one is to appeal to the will of human beings that created that event. And they are compatible with each other. But I think the predestination of God, if there was such a predestination, was not finalized. Because, God is free and God is able to change His mind. So, if there was a predestination, that predestination was qualified. And because of this, Imam Hussain has, a kind of hope, even in the day of Ashura. He had a hope to, change the situation, to prevent people to talk to the enemy and to avoid that tragic event. Also, we believe in the predestination, but that predestination does not mean that we are not free. And I think these two explanations are compatible with each other. Whatever would happen, even if in Karbala we had a peace and Imam Hussain remained alive, we can say that it was the predestination of God to keep him alive. So the decision of God and the predestination is neutral with regard to whatever is going to happen. If the event goes another way, and if Imam Hussain succeed, or if he remained alive, in all of these situations, we could explain what happened by referring to the will of God.
Thank you, Dr. Fanai. I'm closing there on a very complex issue of freedom and predestination, but on the wider topic of explaining the moral approach to and its applicability to the issue of Karbala was a very fascinating presentation, and I thank you profusely for ending this series of the seminar, academic research seminars in this semester on such a wonderful note. And thank you so much. We are now approaching the time for Salat in London, at least. But wherever you are, thank you all for attending virtually the seminar. And please pray for us in all your situations. Thank you so much. Thank you.